Populism. It's a term you hear constantly, isn't it? Flooding the news, political debates.
Absolutely. It gets thrown around a lot.
But what is it really? Beyond just a buzzword. Is it just about these charismatic leaders, the big rallies, or is something else going on?
That's exactly the core question we need to unpack today, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's easy to focus on the surface stuff, the style, the rhetoric.
Right.
But to really understand populism, you kind of need to dig deeper into its actual mechanics.
And that's what we're doing here. You shared this really comprehensive academic work with us, Global Political Sociology, by Thorsten Wojczewski, The Inter- and Transnational Politics of Populism.
Yeah, it's quite detailed.
It is. And our goal today is to sort of pull out the key insights from it, make them accessible for you, the listener.
Exactly. We want to move beyond thinking of populism as just like a particular style or maybe a thin set of policies. Instead, we're exploring it as a specific political logic, a distinct way that political actors frame things, how they construct identities. And this gets really interesting when you look at foreign policy.
Yeah, because usually you think populism, you think domestic politics, right? But this book shows how that core us versus them thing, it plays out internationally too. And what I found really helpful is the sheer range of examples the author uses.
Oh, definitely. It's a broad analysis. It looks at contemporary populism, both left and right wing, across different parts of the world.
So who are we talking about?
Well, on the right, there are cases like Donald Trump in the U.S., Narendra Modi in India, and the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, in Europe.
Okay.
And then on the left, the analysis covers people and movements like Bernie Sanders, also in the U.S., Diam 25 in Europe, and Hugo Chávez in Venezuela.
That variety seems really important. It helps you see the common threads, but also the big differences, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the author, Wojczewski, he doesn't just jump to one definition. He looks at different ways people have tried to understand populism theoretically.
Right.
Before landing on this discourse-based perspective. It draws heavily on Ernesto Laclau's work.
And that means focusing on language.
Essentially, yes. It emphasizes how language and communication construct political reality.
Right.
Populism, from this angle, is about a specific way of doing politics, using particular ways of talking and framing.
Okay, let's get into that. This idea that populism isn't just a simple ideology, that might challenge how some people think about it.
It often does, because, some approaches really oversimplify it. They might dismiss it as just bad manners or like political amateurism, focusing on a leader's style maybe. But that misses the strategic use of language, the underlying structure.
So if it's not just an ideology, what is it? You said a discourse. Tell us more about that.
Okay, so thinking of it as a discourse means seeing it as a way of using language to build political categories, to create identities. It's not just about the policies or the leader's personality.
But how things are said.
Exactly. It's how issues get framed, how stories are constructed, how meaning is made through language. It's like ideology might be the ingredients, but discourse is the recipe, how you combine them.
Got it. And a key concept here is articulation. What's that about?
Articulation is, it's really vital. It's the process of linking different ideas or grievances or symbols together in a specific way.
How so?
Well, for example, a populist discourse might connect economic worries, maybe job losses, with concerns about immigration. By linking those, it creates a specific story about why those jobs were lost and who might be to blame.
So it's about strategically connecting the dots to build a narrative. And what's the absolute core element of that narrative?
The absolute bedrock, the central feature, is creating this antagonistic division.
Yeah.
It's the people versus the elite. That's the mainline populist draw.
And how does that work? How do they use that division?
Well, populist leaders will position themselves as the only ones who truly speak for the real people. The ordinary, hardworking folks who feel ignored or even harmed by a corrupt, self-serving elite.
An elite that's out of touch.
Exactly. Portrayed as completely disconnected from the lives and worries of regular citizens.
And it's often framed morally, too, isn't it? Not just politically.
Oh, absolutely. The people are presented as, fundamentally good, pure, authentic, while the elite are painted as corrupt, self-interested, maybe even morally bankrupt. That adds a lot of emotional weight.
Okay, now let's connect this back to foreign policy. The book says populists use this logic internationally, too, with two main strategies. What's the first one?
The first strategy takes that domestic people versus elite fight and applies it to foreign policy issues. So the populist discourse will accuse the domestic elite, the establishment, maybe corporations, intellectuals, of basically selling out the nation's people in their foreign dealings, prioritizing, say, special interests or globalist agendas over the good of the country.
Can you give us an example from the book?
Sure. Think about Donald Trump. He consistently hammered the political establishment for, in his view, betraying American workers through globalization deals.
Right, the bad deals.
And getting into endless foreign wars that didn't help ordinary Americans. Or look at the AfD. In Germany, they often attack the German establishment for supposedly serving foreign interests and wasting taxpayer money on ineffective foreign policy.
Okay, so the elites at home are making bad foreign policy choices that hurt the people. What's the second strategy?
The second strategy kind of escalates things.
Yeah.
It links those same domestic elites with so-called dangerous foreign others. So the accusation becomes that the domestic elite isn't just incompetent or self-interested, they're actively collaborating with external threats. That could be other countries, international bodies, migrants.
Inspiring together.
That's often the implication, conspiring to undermine the nation's sovereignty, its security, its prosperity.
Wow, okay. How does that play out in the examples?
Well, again, with Trump, he often linked globalization not just to bad deals, but specifically to financial elites getting rich, while American workers suffered, suggesting a kind of collusion.
I see.
The AfD explicitly connects domestic elites to a globalist elite, claiming they work together to erode German identity through immigration and the EU.
And Modi?
In Modi's discourse, according to the analysis, there have been times where religious minorities inside India are subtly linked to external enemies, with the implication that the previous establishment, the Congress Party, was appeasing them, weakening the nation.
These are definitely potent narratives. They really tap into feels about control and outside threats. Let's look closer at the right-wing examples now, starting with Trump. How did foreign policy fit into his specific brand of populism?
For Trump, foreign policy was absolutely central to performing his right-wing populism. He constantly drew that line between the forgotten men and women and this corrupt political establishment that he argued cared more about globalism than Americanism. America First was the perfect slogan for that.
It directly targeted that idea of a globalist elite.
Yeah.
And he definitely used scapegoating, blaming foreign countries.
Constantly. Blaming other countries for ripping off the U.S. on trade, blaming immigrants for domestic problems. It tapped into that sense of lack of grievance. Yeah. And he kept that people-light divide sharp by attacking the fake news media, the deep state.
Positioning himself as the only one fighting for the people.
Exactly.
Okay, turning to Germany and the AfD, how did they use foreign policy? You mentioned they emerged during crises.
Yes. Crises like the Euro crisis, the 2015 refugee crisis, were key moments. They tapped into a feeling among some voters that the established parties weren't listening.
So how do they frame the people?
Their discourse constructs the people in two ways, really. As citizens who feel ignored and as an endangered ethno-cultural German nation, threatened by elites and by foreign influences or others.
So for them, foreign policy is almost existential, about saving German identity.
That's very much how it's framed. They talk about a battle for the existence of the German people. They accuse the mainstream parties of a disoriented foreign policy, meaning influenced by outsiders, serving foreign interests. They really hammer the EU's democratic deficit and the pro-EU stance of other parties to reinforce that people-led divide. The AfD positions itself as the defender of German sovereignty against this supposed globalist elite.
And Narendra Modi in India, the book notes it's a bit different because the BJP is an established party.
Right. Populism for Modi and the BJP often works alongside or supplements their core Hindu nationalist ideology. It's maybe less front and center than for Trump or the AfD.
But he still uses that people-lite framing.
Yes, claiming to represent the true people, often framed as the Hindu majority, against a pseudo-secular elite accused of neglecting Hindu interests.
And he used his personal story, too.
Absolutely. The whole Chaiwala, the tea seller background, was used strategically to project this image of an outsider, someone who understands ordinary people, despite his long political career.
And foreign policy under Modi?
It's often used as a stage for Hindu nationalist identity politics, sometimes associating religious minorities with external threats, as we mentioned. The Chowkidar, or watchman image, plays into that, protecting India. And while they talk multilateralism, the focus is very much on India's specific interests and sovereignty.
It really shows how this core populist logic morphs depending on the context. Okay, let's shift gears. What about left-wing populism? How does the book describe it?
Well, left-wing populism, looking at someone like Bernie Sanders, often springs from similar feelings: economic insecurity, inequality, feeling shut out of the political process.
But framed differently.
Yes, framed through a different lens. Sanders, for instance, built his idea of the people by linking various grievances, economic inequality, corporate power against an establishment seen as unresponsive or unjust.
And his focus was less on, say, ethnic identity and more on democracy and fairness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't about returning to some idealized past. It was about demanding a more just, more participatory democracy. He framed the fight as democracy versus oligarchy.
Highlighting corporate influence.
Right, pointing to the power of billionaires and corporations in politics and foreign policy. He was critical of establishment foreign policy driven by special interests, but his alternative tended towards global partnership, not isolation or pure dominance.
Interesting. What about Diem-25 in Europe? How did they fit in?
Diem-25 really grew out of the Eurozone crisis, particularly the handling of Greece. They argue to show this huge clash between popular sovereignty, the people's will, and technocratic rule by EU elites.
So they blamed EU institutions.
Directly. Blamed them for causing economic pain and for what they called escalating authoritarianism. They saw a fundamental crisis in how capitalism and democracy were interacting in Europe.
And who were the people for them? It seemed both European and national.
Yeah, it was an interesting balancing act. They appealed to a kind of transnational European demos, all Europeans together, and to the distinct peoples of Europe within their nations. The goal was democratizing the EU, but also respecting national sovereignty.
And finally, Hugo Chávez, a major figure in Latin American left-wing populism. What defined his approach, especially internationally?
Chávez came up during major crises in Venezuela tied to neoliberal policies. He framed it all as part of a bigger global crisis caused by savage neoliberalism.
So his main elite or antagonist was global.
Very much so. He identified the neoliberal project of global capitalist domination and the U.S. empire as the key opponents of the people in Venezuela and really the global South.
And his foreign policy reflected that directly.
Absolutely. It was all about building alliances to challenge that dominance, unifying countries and movements in the global South based on anti-imperialism, using international platforms, creating initiatives like ALBA.
The Bolivarian Alliance?
Right, to promote a different model, a counterweight to U.S. influence.
It does seem like a key difference emerges there. Right-wing populism often points to national others, while left-wing populism tends to target more systemic, often global, forces like capitalism or imperialism as the elite.
That's a fair generalization based on these examples, yes.
Now, the book also touches on populism crossing borders, the transnational aspect. Is it just a national thing, or are there links?
It's mostly national, but there are definitely transnational dimensions. On the right, you see parties in Europe and someone like Trump using similar language about a globalist elite enemy.
But they aren't really united.
Not in a deep way. Their focus stays overwhelmingly on their own nation state, on national sovereignty. There have been meetings, like the one Salvini organized in Milan, but it's more about signaling than building a truly transnational movement.
And on the left, more connections there.
Yes, arguably more concrete efforts. You have things like the Progressive International, which explicitly tries to link up progressive movements globally to fight shared oppressive hierarchies.
And ALBA.
ALBA is a key regional example, yes. A left-wing project designed to foster alternative cooperation and specifically challenge U.S. influence in Latin America.
Okay, so even with these connections, the nation-state seems to remain the main stage for most populism. All right, let's try to pull this all together. Based on Wojczewski's analysis, what are the main takeaways for you, the listener?
Well, first, I think, is seeing populism not as some fixed ideology, but as this flexible political logic built around that people versus elite conflict. Second, foreign policy isn't separate. It's a really key space where populists build identities and mobilize people by pointing fingers at internal and external enemies.
Makes sense.
Third, right-wing populism often merges this logic with nationalism. Big focus on sovereignty, often scapegoating immigrants or international bodies.
And fourth,
left-wing populism, while using the same core people-light division, tends to have broader, more inclusive ideas of the people. And it can have these stronger transnational elements, challenging global inequality, pushing for more democracy.
Right.
And finally, despite those transnational links we discussed, for most populist movements today, the nation-state is still the main game.
So what does this all mean for you, trying to make sense of the political world? Hopefully thinking about populism as this kind of discursive strategy, this way of framing things.
Yeah, it gives you a lens, doesn't it?
It does. So when you hear that rhetoric, the people versus the elite, leaders supposedly colluding with foreign powers against citizens, you can recognize that underlying populist logic.
And this deep dive really highlights that while they share features, populist movements aren't all the same. They look different depending on the context, history, left or right.
And their foreign policy approach often reveals a lot about what they're really concerned about and who they see as the enemy.
Definitely.
So maybe some food for thought to leave you with. This core people versus elite split, does it really reflect how complex our world is now, how interconnected everything is?
It's a powerful simplification, but does it capture reality?
Right. And does framing things constantly as us versus them, does that actually help us solve the big global problems we face, or does it maybe get in the way? This look at populism and how it shapes world politics is, well, it's a starting point for thinking more critically about these powerful forces.